March 17, 1952. The Red Rooster, Harlem. Tommy Sullivan walked through those doors with 12 armed men behind him. The Irish mob boss who controlled half of Brooklyn. The man who called Harlem monkey territory in front of reporters. He spotted Bumpy Johnson sitting alone at the corner table. Sullivan grabbed a whiskey glass, walked straight up to Bumpy, and threw the entire drink in his face. Every person in that room held their breath. Because in Harlem, disrespecting Bumpy Johnson was signing your own death certificate. Bumpy sat there, whiskey dripping down his face. Not moving, not speaking, just staring at Sullivan with those cold, dead eyes that made hardened criminals confess their sins. Sullivan laughed. His men laughed. They thought they had just humiliated the King of Harlem in his own kingdom. What they didn't know was that Bumpy had already decided exactly how Sullivan would die. And it would happen before sunrise. The Red Rooster was packed that night. 230 people witnessed the disrespect. Jazz music playing. Cigarette smoke thick in the air. Waitresses frozen in place holding trays of drinks. Sullivan stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for Bumpy to react. Waiting for the legendary gangster to swing. To pull a gun. To do something. Bumpy did nothing. He slowly pulled out a white handkerchief from his pocket. Wiped his face clean. Folded the handkerchief. Put it back in his pocket. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile a shark gives before it attacks. Sullivan turned to his men and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is the man you all fear? This is the King of Harlem? Looks like a wet dog to me." His crew erupted in laughter. They had no idea they were already dead men. Bumpy stood up slowly. Straightened his tie. Buttoned his suit jacket. He looked at Sullivan and said 6 words that made the entire room go silent. "You have until the sun rises." If you want the full truth about what happened next, hit like so this story reaches more people who need to understand what real power looks like. 3 weeks before this moment, Sullivan had made a critical mistake. He tried to expand his gambling operation into Harlem. He opened an illegal casino on 125th Street without asking permission from Bumpy Johnson. In Harlem, you didn't breathe without Bumpy's approval. The Irish mob controlled the docks. The Italians had Little Italy. The Jewish syndicate ran Midtown. But Harlem belonged to one man, Bumpy Johnson. And Sullivan had just declared war. Bumpy was born Ellsworth Raymond Johnson in 1905. By 15 years old, he had killed 3 men. By 20, he controlled every numbers racket in Harlem. By 35, he had survived 14 assassination attempts. The police couldn't touch him. The FBI had a file on him 3 inches thick but could never make charges stick. Even the Italian Mafia, the most powerful crime organization in America, negotiated with Bumpy as an equal. Not because they liked him. Because they feared him. Sullivan thought he was different. He thought his Irish connections and political bribes made him untouchable. He thought Bumpy was just another black gangster the system would eventually crush. He was wrong about everything. Bumpy had informants in the police department. Judges on his payroll. Politicians who owed him favors. And most importantly, he had 40,000 people in Harlem who would die for him. Because Bumpy wasn't just a gangster. He was a protector. He kept drugs out of Harlem schools. He funded scholarships for black students. He made sure elderly folks had groceries during winter. When the police brutalized someone, Bumpy handled it. When landlords tried to evict families, Bumpy intervened. The people loved him. And love is more powerful than fear. Comment justice if you believe Sullivan deserved what was coming. Sullivan opened his casino on a Tuesday. By Friday, Bumpy had shut it down without firing a single shot. He didn't raid the place. Didn't threaten Sullivan. He simply sent a message to every gambler in New York. Anyone caught in Sullivan's casino answers to me. The casino was empty by Saturday. Sullivan lost $47,000 that week. That's when he made his second mistake. He came to Harlem looking for revenge. March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. Sullivan chose this date on purpose. The Irish holiday. His day. He wanted to humiliate Bumpy on the day when Irish power was celebrated across America. He gathered 12 of his best enforcers. Men who had killed for him before. Men with reputations built on violence. They walked into the Red Rooster at exactly 9:47 p.m. Bumpy was sitting alone because he always sat alone when he was thinking. A bottle of bourbon on the table. A cigar burning in the ashtray. He saw Sullivan walk in. He knew why Sullivan was there. And he had already prepared for this moment 3 days earlier. Sullivan's crew spread out around the restaurant. Hands on their guns. Ready for war. But Bumpy's men didn't move. They were scattered throughout the room, dressed like regular customers. 14 men total. All armed. All waiting for the signal. Sullivan was outnumbered and didn't even know it. He strutted toward Bumpy's table like a peacock. Grabbed that whiskey glass. Threw the drink. And sealed his fate. After Bumpy said those 6 words, Sullivan laughed again. The sun rises? What are you gonna do? Put a curse on me. He turned to leave. His men followed him toward the door. Bumpy sat back down. Picked up his cigar. Took a long drag. One of his men approached the table and whispered, "Should we follow them, boss?" Bumpy shook his head. "No need. They're not leaving Harlem alive." Type yes if you want to know exactly how Bumpy planned every detail of what happened next. Sullivan and his crew walked out of the Red Rooster at 10:03 p.m. They headed toward their cars parked on Lenox Avenue. The streets were busy. People celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Green decorations everywhere. Music pouring out of bars. Sullivan felt invincible. He had just embarrassed the most feared man in Harlem and walked out alive. What he didn't notice was that every street lamp between the Red Rooster and his car had been shot out 2 hours earlier. What he didn't see was that 5 cars had blocked off both ends of the street. What he didn't understand was that Bumpy Johnson never made threats. He made promises. Sullivan's driver opened the car door. That's when the first shot rang out. It hit the streetlight above them, showering glass on their heads. Sullivan and his men drew their guns, spinning around looking for the shooter. They saw nothing. Just darkness and shadows. Then a voice echoed from somewhere in the dark. Bumpy's voice. Cold. Measured. "You came to my home. You disrespected me in front of my people. Now you pay the price." Panic set in. Sullivan's men started firing randomly into the darkness. Bullets ricocheting off buildings. Windows shattering. People screaming and running for cover. But they weren't hitting anything because there was nothing to hit. Bumpy's men were positioned on rooftops. In doorways. Behind cars. Invisible. Professional. They weren't shooting to kill yet. They were shooting to terrify. And it was working. Sullivan screamed at his driver. "Get us out of here." They scrambled into the car. The engine roared to life. The driver slammed the gas pedal. The car lurched forward and made it exactly 15 feet before all 4 tires exploded. Bumpy's men had scattered tire spikes across the entire street. The car screeched to a halt, rims grinding against concrete, throwing sparks into the night air. Share this video so people understand how Bumpy Johnson controlled every inch of Harlem. Sullivan and his crew abandoned the car and ran. They split up, thinking it would be harder to track them. Fatal mistake. Bumpy had 73 men positioned throughout a 6-block radius. Every alley. Every fire escape. Every basement entrance. Sullivan's men were running through a maze that Bumpy had built. One by one, they disappeared into the darkness. One by one, the screaming stopped. Sullivan made it 4 blocks before he realized he was alone. His 12 men were gone. He ducked into an alley, gasping for air, gun shaking in his hand. He heard footsteps approaching from both ends of the alley. Slow, deliberate, confident. Then he saw them. 6 men walking toward him from each direction. 12 total. The exact same number of men Sullivan had brought to the Red Rooster. Bumpy's message was clear. "You brought 12. I'm sending 12. But Bumpy wasn't there. He was still sitting at his table in the Red Rooster. Drinking bourbon. Smoking his cigar. Someone asked him if he wanted updates on Sullivan. Bumpy shook his head. "I already know how it ends." And he did. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't leave things to chance. Every detail was planned. Every outcome predicted. Every move calculated 3 steps ahead. Sullivan tried to negotiate. He offered money. He begged for his life. He promised to leave Harlem and never come back. Bumpy's men said nothing. They just stood there, waiting. Then one of them spoke. "The boss said you have until sunrise. It's 11:47 p.m. You still have time to make peace with whatever God you believe in." Sullivan fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The tough Irish mob boss who had killed 17 men in his career was crying like a child. If this story shocked you, comment respect below to honor Bumpy's legacy. The sun rose at 6:23 a.m. on March 18, 1952. Tommy Sullivan's body was found at exactly 6:22 a.m. He was sitting upright in his own car, which had been pushed back to the front of the Red Rooster during the night. His eyes were open. No visible wounds on his body. The coroner's report said heart attack. But everyone in Harlem knew the truth. Sullivan died of fear. Pure, absolute terror. Because Bumpy's men had spent 7 hours with him. Not torturing him physically, but telling him stories. Stories of every man who had ever crossed Bumpy Johnson. Stories of how they died. Stories of what happened to their families. By sunrise, Sullivan's heart simply gave out. His 12 men were found throughout Harlem. All alive. All unharmed. But all forever changed. They left New York that same day and never spoke about what happened. The Irish mob never tried to enter Harlem again. The message was received loud and clear. You don't disrespect Bumpy Johnson. You don't challenge his authority. You don't even think about crossing him. Because Bumpy didn't rule through violence alone. He ruled through intelligence. Through strategy. Through understanding human psychology better than anyone alive. The police investigated Sullivan's death for 6 weeks. They interviewed 300 witnesses. They searched every building in a 10-block radius. They found nothing. No evidence. No witnesses willing to talk. No trail leading back to Bumpy. The case was closed. Death by natural causes. The FBI knew better but couldn't prove anything. Bumpy had orchestrated the perfect crime. A murder without murder. A message without words. A demonstration of power that would be remembered for generations. 2 days after Sullivan's death, Bumpy returned to the Red Rooster. Same table. Same time. Same bourbon. The owner approached him nervously. "Mr. Johnson, about the other night, the mess, the damage." Bumpy cut him off. He pulled out an envelope containing $5,000. "For the broken windows. For the trauma to your staff. For your loyalty." The owner took the money with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you." Bumpy nodded. Never speak of that night again. It never happened. Sullivan died of a heart attack in his car. That's the only truth. And that became the official story. Even Sullivan's own family accepted it. Because crossing Bumpy Johnson meant crossing 40,000 people who would die to protect him. It meant crossing politicians who needed his support. It meant crossing police officers on his payroll. It meant facing an enemy who was always 10 steps ahead. Always watching. Always waiting. The legend of that night spread throughout the criminal underworld. From New York to Chicago to Los Angeles. Every mob boss heard the story. Every gang leader learned the lesson. You could control territory through fear. You could make money through violence. But true power? True power came from being smarter than everyone else. From understanding that reputation is built not on how many people you kill, but on how you kill them. From knowing that sometimes the most terrifying thing you can do is nothing at all. Like this video if you understand why Bumpy Johnson was the most feared man in Harlem's history. Bumpy Johnson lived another 16 years after that night. He died in 1968 at age 62. Not from a rival's bullet. Not in prison. He died of a heart attack while having breakfast at Wells Restaurant in Harlem. Surrounded by friends. At peace. Even in death, Bumpy Johnson controlled his own narrative. His funeral drew over 10,000 people. The streets of Harlem were packed. People crying. People sharing stories. People honoring a man who had protected them for 4 decades. The police stayed away. The FBI agents watched from a distance. The other crime families sent representatives to pay respects. Because Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster. He was a legend. A myth. A man who proved that intelligence beats violence. That strategy beats strength. That respect earned is more powerful than fear imposed. The Red Rooster still stands in Harlem today. Same location, different owners. But the locals know. They know about that night. They know about Tommy Sullivan. They know about the man who threw a drink in Bumpy Johnson's face and never walked out of Harlem alive. They tell the story to their children, their grandchildren, keeping the legend alive, keeping the memory sacred. Because that's what Bumpy Johnson understood better than anyone. Legacy isn't about how long you live. It's about how long people remember you after you're gone. It's about the stories they tell, the lessons they learn, the fear and respect your name still commands decades after your death. Tommy Sullivan made one critical mistake. He thought Bumpy Johnson was just another street thug. Just another criminal who got lucky. Just another black man in a white man's world who would eventually be put in his place. He was wrong about all of it. Bumpy Johnson was a strategist, a leader, a man who understood power in ways Sullivan never could. A man who knew that true strength isn't shown through loud displays of violence. It's shown through quiet, calculated, inevitable justice. Comment what shocked you most about this story. The night Sullivan threw that drink, Bumpy could have killed him right there. He had 14 armed men in that room. He could have turned the Red Rooster into a bloodbath. But he didn't. Because that's not how legends are built. Legends are built through restraint. Through making your enemy destroy themselves. Through giving someone enough rope to hang themselves and then watching them do it. Bumpy sat in that chair with whiskey dripping down his face because he knew something Sullivan didn't. He knew that everyone in that room would remember this moment. He knew that his response would define his legacy. He knew that killing Sullivan immediately would make him look reactive. Emotional. But giving Sullivan time to feel safe, to think he won, to celebrate his victory, and then slowly, methodically, inevitably hunting him down? That's what separates average criminals from legendary ones. The 6 words Bumpy spoke weren't a threat. They were a prophecy. You have until the sun rises. He gave Sullivan 9 hours. 9 hours to run. 9 hours to hide. 9 hours to realize the magnitude of his mistake. 9 hours to understand that you don't disrespect a king in his kingdom. 9 hours to feel the terror of knowing that death is coming and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want more untold stories about the legends who shaped American history through power, intelligence, and unbreakable will. Sullivan's biggest mistake wasn't throwing the drink. It was underestimating who Bumpy Johnson really was. History books don't teach you about Bumpy. Schools don't mention his name. But in Harlem? In the streets where real power was built? Bumpy Johnson's name is spoken with reverence. With respect. With the kind of awe reserved for men who changed the game forever. He wasn't the richest gangster. He wasn't the most violent. He wasn't the most connected. But he was the smartest. He understood psychology. He understood optics. He understood that power isn't taken, it's given. And Harlem gave him power because he earned it. Because he protected them. Because he fought for them. Because when the world tried to crush them, Bumpy Johnson stood in the way and said no. That's why 40,000 people would have died for him. That's why Sullivan never stood a chance. That's why every gang boss in America learned to respect the name Bumpy Johnson. Because you can't kill one man when 40,000 would die for him. You can't disrespect one man when an entire community stands behind him. You can't win a war when your enemy controls every street, every building, every person in the territory you're trying to conquer. Tommy Sullivan walked into the Red Rooster thinking he was teaching Bumpy Johnson a lesson. He walked out having learned the most important lesson of his life. A lesson that killed him before the sun rose. Respect is earned through actions, not demanded through words. Power is built through loyalty, not enforced through fear. And legends? Legends are made by men who understand that true strength is knowing when to strike and having the patience to wait for the perfect moment. Bumpy Johnson waited his whole life to become a legend. And when a racist Irish mob boss threw a drink in his face, Bumpy didn't waste the opportunity. He turned a moment of disrespect into a demonstration of absolute power. He turned one man's mistake into a warning that echoed through generations. He turned a simple confrontation into the stuff of legend. That's the difference between men who are remembered and men who are forgotten. Bumpy Johnson will never be forgotten. His name will live forever in the streets of Harlem, in the stories told by those who knew him, in the lessons learned by those who study real power. Tommy Sullivan? He's a footnote, a warning, a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate your enemy. Leave a comment about which untold story you want next, and make sure you're subscribed because these legends deserve to be remembered.